Anyone who learns how to drive a semi in order to escape her stalker is a true warrior.
Right, but even though she did all that, he still found her.
But that was the only way she could escape him for months at a time.
I mean, it's sad that she had to live like that, but at least she was able to figure out a way to live like that.
All I kept asking myself is why would anyone stalk me? I'm not rich. I'm not famous. I'm not particularly interesting or beautiful. I'm a broke single mom. Why would anyone be stalking me? And because I couldn't answer that question, I just ignored all the signs. Well, then no one is stalking me.
I'm Jaimie Beebe.
And I'm Jake Deptula. On today's episode of Strictly Stalking, we're chatting with author Helena Jayne, who was terrorized by her stalker for over 13 years.
Helena met a tall, dark, and handsome man while dancing in a nightclub.
They had a brief fling, and although he wanted something more, Helena made it clear that she didn't have time for a boyfriend.
She immediately began getting strange calls, notes on her car, and items being left on her back porch when she wasn't home.
He then broke into her house, and while she and her daughter were sleeping, he secretly planted a recording device in her bathroom to film both her and her daughter.
She moved over 1,000 miles away, but he still followed her. Her case eventually attracted the attention of the FBI.
Now Helena is here to share her journey, which is the basis for her book, Blue Moon Rare Fire, the extraordinary true story of a woman's rise when darkness fell. Helena, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Ohio, in Columbus, Ohio.
What was that like?
I grew up in a wonderful community, a wonderful family. We were close. We still are close. It was a very safe upbringing. I would call us upper middle class. We really didn't want for anything. We had, plenty of Christmas presents under the tree and nice, big, hearty, home-cooked meals. We oftentimes took road trips in the summer to the ocean. So I lived a very special, privileged, blessed life growing up.
And what was your life like up until meeting your stalker?
I suppose I was, lived an average life. I can't say there was anything particularly remarkable. There were certainly certain incidents that happened in my life that brought pain or created heartache for me. But overall, I lived a relatively normal life. I worked full-time. I had friends. I was somewhat of an extrovert. I laughed a lot. I've always been a free spirit. So life was good.
When and how did you meet your stalker?
Shortly before I met my stalker, my 10-year-old daughter at the time went down to the Gulf Coast in Mississippi to visit her father. While she was there, Hurricane Katrina struck. She was a catastrophic storm, and she leveled 80% of the Gulf coastline. All forms of communication were completely disabled. Meanwhile, I'm back in Ohio, and for 3 days, I didn't know if she had made it through the storm. She did make it through the storm, and she came home safely. But after that incident, something changed in me profoundly. I felt very disconnected from life. I really couldn't find my happy place. I would watch my hands cook dinner or check her homework, but it felt like someone else was doing it. So I was in a very numb, disconnected place. It would be 2 months later that I went out that night and I met the man who would become my stalker.
Where did you meet your stalker?
We met in a nightclub. A girlfriend of mine who kind of knew what I was going through invited me out that evening. I eagerly accepted. I loved the idea of kind of getting dressed up, high heels, nails, curl your hair, put on some makeup, go out and feel pretty, laugh. And so I just kind of eagerly accepted that invitation, and we went to a place that she was very familiar with. I had never been there before. And so it all started with just kind of a girls' night out in a nightclub.
Did he come up to you?
He did. He approached me about halfway through the evening. By then I was pretty intoxicated. I wasn't driving that night. Feeling very good, better than I had in a long time. Feeling very alive, I suppose. And he just kind of approached me and began real casual conversation. You know, have never seen you here before. Where are you from? That kind of thing. I really didn't take it seriously. I don't even remember what my answers were. I took his conversation very lighthearted. I probably walked away from him many times, and then I would turn around and there he is again. And so it was a very casual beginning, very light conversation. I do remember clearly his eyes. I remember his eyes. They were so black. I'd really never seen eyes that dark before, and I was slightly mesmerized by them. I believe, had one, I not been drinking, and two, I not been a place in my life where my radar was disabled, I believe I would have seen madness in those eyes, but I didn't. And so I passed him my number.
When did he reach out next to contact you?
Immediately. I'm going to use the phrase blew up my phone. Blew up my phone. It made me uneasy. So I didn't return his call. I didn't return his call for several days. He stopped calling. And when I say blew up my phone, I'm saying maybe 6 times the next day, maybe 7 times the day after. Well, then the work week began. I worked a Monday through Friday job. I was a tutor, a reading tutor in an elementary school. And so I think I would have waited probably until that next weekend when his calls had stopped to finally answer the call when he called a little while later.
Did you start to get concerned when you saw all these calls from this guy coming in?
At first, I thought he was just very eager to talk to me and perhaps excited. But then after, you know, the calls kind of keep going on all day, I thought, whoa, that's like, don't you have anything to do? Why are you calling me that much? There was that sense of, but when he stopped, that feeling went away. So by the time he called me next weekend, I'd already have 5 days of busyness, single mom, cooking dinner, checking homework, preparing for work the next day, doing laundry. It kind of got lost in the din of my life. So when he called the following weekend, I think it was more like, oh, that's that guy I met at the bar. Okay, I'll go ahead and take this call. And I did. I probably saw him several weeks later. I was very busy with my life, and he wasn't pressing me to see me right away. That made me feel a little bit more comfortable. He reassured me he had a very busy life too. And so I don't think that we got together for the first time to just have dinner and drinks for probably several weeks after we met.
What was, when you had drinks with him, what was that like?
I really was overwhelmed with how boring he was. That's not how I remembered him. He was so calm and flat-toned that I remember thinking, I really had to have been drunk that night. Perhaps that was an act. Perhaps not. But I was very unimpressed. What I was impressed by was how willing he was to let us run on my schedule. His openness to whenever you're free, whenever it works for you. And as a single mom who's not looking for a boyfriend, not looking for a husband, not looking for a partner, At that time in my life, convenient was incredibly sexy. And it's in that spirit that I continued to talk to him.
What did you learn about him as things progressed?
He came from a family that enjoyed a pretty good reputation in town. His father held a position in the state government. His family had a good reputation, hardworking, lots of connections. He seemed very calm. It seemed like everyone knew him. Once I began, telling people, whether it was at my job or whatnot, about this person, it was amazing how many people either knew of the family or knew the family directly. That reassured me that I wasn't dealing with a complete stranger. I didn't hear a single bad word about either him or the family.
Did you feel at this time like he was putting on, the kind of sort of like first date best impression, or was there something beyond that you thought, okay, well, he may be a good guy, maybe boring, but he may be a good guy?
I would say the latter. I felt like he may be kind of boring, but he seems like a pretty good guy, and there's no information out there that suggests otherwise. And so I began to feel more comfortable with him. Now, keep in mind, that is not to say I began to open up my mind to the idea of dating him. At no point in time did I ever get the impression that he was the one or even could be the one. He kind of fell into the category of till something better comes along, or this fits my life right now. He won't forever. I never saw him as a long-term anything.
Was he aware that you felt that way?
Absolutely.
And what did he say about it? Was he in agreement?
He most certainly was in agreement with it. He felt like that kind of fit his life as well. That he was very busy. He had children, and he was career oriented, or so he said. And I had no reason to believe that he was not. He fit the bill. He dressed well. He had a nice car. He clearly had some success under his belt. It just kind of seemed, I wouldn't even use the word unspoken agreement between us, because it was very much decided between us that this was just something that felt nice and felt safe right now.
What were the first red flags that came up?
Well, there's a difference between the first red flags that came up and the first red flags that I noticed. The first red flags that I did not notice was shortly after I began communicating with him. I started receiving a series of phone calls every morning and every evening, every day. At first, I don't know that I paid a whole lot of attention to it. But then as it progressed, days upon weeks, turning into months, you really start, whoa, wait a minute. What is going on with these calls every morning and every night? I became aware of it. And as I began scrolling through my caller ID, I realized that the calls always came at 10:04. 10:04 in the morning, 10:04 in the evening. And that made me very uncomfortable, because that was so intentional. If I ever answered these calls, the person on the other end of the phone never said anything. I knew someone was there, but they never said a word, and they stayed on the phone as long as I sat there saying, hello? Who is this? Who keeps calling me? What do you want? You have the wrong number. Once I began to realize that there was a pattern, and I identified the 10:04, well, then I was able to react to it. I realized there was a pattern, and I'm going to do something. So I went and bought an air horn. So the next time I got a call at 10:04, I was sitting right on my bed with an air horn in my hand. I answered the phone and I let the air horn rip. For the very first time, he hung up first, and I never got another call at 10:04 again. So the next incident that, upon reflection, I can look back and say were certainly red flags, was an incident, or many incidents, at the pool the following summer. We lived in a very nice community with a private pool, and my daughter and I visited the pool every day in the summer. And of course, I'm a teacher's assistant, so I have summers off, and my daughter has summers off, and it was our favorite recreational time. And at some point during that summer, I noticed a man in a beat-up car sitting within proximity to the pool so he can see the pool. And he's kind of slumped down in the driver's seat. The steering wheel is somewhat obscuring his head. The windshields are very tinted, and he has a ball hat pulled down over his eyes. And he sits there for a long time. And I kind of keep looking over my shoulder. He doesn't fit in. His car doesn't fit in. Somebody just sitting in a car like this in this private gated community. It all felt very strange to me. But what felt the strangest was it really felt like he was staring at me. Now, there's no way I could know for sure tinted windows at a distance, dark glasses, but I felt it, like the weight of his gaze. And that's what sent up red flags. So I kind of watched him for a while. I got in the pool. When I got out of the pool, I decided I was going to take down his license plate. So I'm reaching in my purse, trying to dig for a pen and a piece of paper. And when I look up, he's gone. This man keeps reappearing throughout that summer. He's parked in different places. He's driving different cars. But it always feels like he's staring at me. I tell the pool manager that I think that there's something strange about that car. He kind of looks over and he just brushes it off. You know, it could be a friend of a fellow resident waiting for them. It could be a piece of delivery guy. I want to believe him, and so I do. By the end of the summer, it comes to pass that he makes a mistake. So the sun is beginning to set. He comes in a different car, very tinted windows. Only this time, he's not wearing a hat and he's not wearing dark glasses. And what he doesn't realize is the sun is illuminating, the setting sun is shining right in his back window, and it's illuminating his silhouette. Well, my stalker has a bald head, and it has a distinct crest almost at the top. As soon as I saw the silhouette, I knew it was him. And then there comes that moment where you realize it was him all summer. So I immediately sent him a text. Are you sitting outside my pool? With a whole bunch of exclamation marks and question marks. He doesn't say a thing. I get uncomfortable. I gather my daughter and my things. We go home. I lock the door. That night, he sends a text that says, "You're a crazy bitch." And that really surprised me. That was a really strong reaction. The whole thing feels weird to me. And by the time I went to sleep that night, I began convincing myself that I was wrong. It couldn't have been the man that I was dating. It couldn't have been. There are certainly many people with a bald head with a unique shape to it. I just began picking apart all the reasons why it was a case of mistaken identity. And I actually began to feel bad that I had sent him a text accusing him so impulsively.
How often were you seeing him during this summer?
On a dating level,
Yeah.
maybe once a month. Maybe that summer we got together perhaps 3 or 4 times, maybe 5.
And then how often do you think you saw that person outside the pool?
At least once a week, maybe more. It was a regular occurrence.
Were you ever tempted to question him in between dates or anything like that about, strange occurrences? Did you ever tell him a little more about some of the strangers that you were seeing or any of the feelings that you were having that somebody's watching you?
No, I did not. I think after that moment where I accused him of sitting outside my pool, I was embarrassed. And so I really didn't. And I just brushed the whole thing off. Now, meantime, my stalking is escalating. I'm getting a series of personal calls which seem to be very privy to the private details of my life. For example, my daughter and I are sitting in our living room, and we have a conversation that she wants a brat doll. And within a very short period of time, I get a phone call from an unknown number informing me that Kmart is having a sale on Bratz dolls. So I hang up, and looking back, I can't believe I was in denial for so long. And weird is easy to dismiss when it doesn't feel threatening. When it just feels like, that's odd. My situation didn't feel threatening yet. So when the caller called and said, Foot Locker's having a sale on shoes, the very day my daughter and I had discussed going and buying tennis shoes, again, it was weird, but I didn't hold on to it as something that felt threatening. I just kept moving through my life. Even when it became clear that I was being followed, the sense of being followed, seeing familiar cars near me in traffic, coming out of the grocery store, and it's that same beat-up red Bronco sitting near my car. That became a very regular occurrence. And still, I was in denial. While the victim is in denial, she's really doing nothing to stop the stalker from stalking. She doesn't even accept she has one yet. And I was in denial for a very, very long time, mostly because I was extremely focused on the why factor. So in the family of who, what, when, where, why, and how, all I kept asking myself is why would anyone stalk me? I'm not rich. I'm not famous. I'm not particularly interesting or beautiful. I'm a broke single mom. Why would anyone be stalking me? And because I couldn't answer that question, I just ignored all the signs. Well, then no one is stalking me. So that was very problematic for me, being too fixated on why someone would be stalking me. I started to tell family and friends that I felt like I might have a problem. I started seeing the same strangers as I'm moving throughout the normal habits of my day. There were all these little landmines going off in my life, but I really didn't connect all the dots yet, though I was aware that something very weird was happening. So I did start talking to family and friends about it. But they kind of, they thought the idea that I was being stalked was just as crazy as I thought the idea that I was being stalked. So I wouldn't say they didn't believe me. They just told me to, just ignore it. Whoever's bothering you will go away. And because I wanted to believe them, I did. Then the stalking stopped. Altogether stopped. Everything. My life returned to normal. No calls, no notes, no strangers. And I began to tell myself my family and friends were right. I really was misreading the tea leaves. My life is fine.
How long had you been stalked to when it stopped?
About a year and a half, when suddenly everything stopped. And so the holidays came and went. I began to start kind of reconnecting to my inner self. That's starting to dissipate. The stalking is out of my mind. I'm starting to feel a lot better. And then I heard from him again, out of the blue. And his explanation as to why I had not been hearing from him was that he'd been busy at work and there was a family emergency that had now run its course. And he'd missed me, wanted to see me again. Now, keep in mind, I had never been able to truly prove he was the instigator of all of these incidences. So when I heard from him again, there was a part of me that was like, oh, great. And I'm feeling so much better too. Well, let's get together. And so we did. We got together. It was very casual. Around this time, I started having items appear on my back porch, a Heineken beer bottle. I didn't drink beer. I didn't drink Heineken. I'd come home. There's a half-empty bottle of beer, and it's still cold. So you would know the person just recently left. You wake up in the morning, let the cat out, feed it. There's like a partially eaten sandwich or chicken wings. Somebody clearly communicating that they'd been sitting on my back covered patio at night while we slept. Came home one day and all the flower pots are rearranged. Strange, but you can kind of write it off to like a neighborhood prankster, a teenager. I suppose it was the face print on the glass that really began to change my thoughts about it. I woke up one morning and clearly pressed against my kitchen door was the clear image of somebody who had been pressing their face against the glass listening. You could distinctly see the outline of the ear. I could tell they were tall. I could tell they had facial hair from the swirls, the oil left behind on the glass. And there was something about that image that made me freeze. So I moved from strange calls, somebody sitting away from me at a pool, near me in traffic. Everything was at arm's reach. Yet now it's moved not just from my back door, but directly to my back door. What comes next? They come in. And that's what was going through my mind when I saw that. You are getting ever closer to the inside of my house. That was the very first time I ever called the police. They came, they dusted for fingerprints. The cops seemed pretty unconcerned. They didn't try to break in. There was no sign of forced entry. Nothing was stolen. We'll go ahead and take a police report. But it was probably just a nosy neighbor. I wanted to believe him.
Did they tell you to get surveillance? Did they give you any sort of like safety measures to take based on what was happening?
They did not. That's not to say that he wasn't concerned. I don't feel like he took it lightly. I feel like he was trying to reassure me After I called the police the first time, the stalking escalated significantly. It became a bombardment. The notes being left on my car, strangers now approaching me in public saying things to me. Things like, I like your feet in those shoes. Now, this is a person you've never met before, and you're walking out of the tire store, and somebody's calling you by my stalker's last name. Hello, Mrs. I like your feet in those shoes. Now, who in their right mind would call the police to say a man didn't like my shoes? It was the subtlety of it. But of course you're not going to call the police. Yet you're left wondering, who are you and how do you know? Who are you? Why are you saying this to me? How did you know I'd be walking out of a tire store right now? Pets came up missing. My property's being damaged. Friends and family members, when they're over at my house, their cars are being messed with, windows broken, tires slashed. Suddenly, anyone who is in my network or my support system is now the enemy. He's sitting outside my job on a regular basis. And I believe this was kind of the beginning of what I refer to as the gaslight manipulation phase, where he started to slowly groom me to go crazy. Such innocent things were happening to me that alone were not enough to warrant a call to the police, or I would look crazy. Yet it wouldn't stop. It was a bombardment, and it really began to take center stage in my life. I started missing work. I had trouble sleeping.
So you knew this, you knew the whole time then, at least after the face print, that your stalker was the same guy you were dating? Or you weren't sure yet?
I vacillated. There were some mornings I woke up and nothing else made sense. And it was a certainty in my mind beyond all knowing. It is him. And then there were some times where I did not believe that. I wasn't sure. I thought maybe it was a neighbor down the street, or maybe somebody I worked with. I felt like if I labeled him as undoubtedly the only option, I would be possibly not labeling the true culprit and looking, other directions, ignoring clues that I should be paying attention to. So it went back and forth. There wasn't a consistency with how I felt.
And you really had no concrete evidence that it would or would not be him?
No concrete evidence. Just a feeling in my gut.
What was his behavior like during this time?
So he always tried to project an image of kind of like the man of the world, confident, well-dressed, well-spoken, lots of friends, lots of things going on in his life. So my mind went two places. Either he's stalking me, and this is a real problem, or he's not the person stalking me, and he could help. So I never really wanted to completely accuse him to the point where he shut down any communication with me, because keep in mind, his family's well connected. If I needed a team, he was the right guy for that job. So I wasn't sure. I didn't want to alienate him. If it wasn't him, he could be part of my support system. If it was him, I had a real problem on my hands because he knew a lot of people.
So after you established this crossroads between is it him or isn't it him, what happened next?
He came to past that, I started to feel very, very apprehensive, even in my own house, never knowing what would happen next, what incident would take place. Would it be a tale? Would it be a strange phone call, a note on my car? Never knowing where he would turn up, being very thrown off balance out in the world. But when I was home, I felt as safe as one could. Well, then I began being aware, I started having feelings that somebody was entering my house. It was confirmed when one day I came home and I found my daughter was at school and young, can't drive. And I was at work. Well, I was the first one home that day. And all the fruit in our fruit bowl was lined up on my kitchen island as if it was like a choo-choo train, one after the other. And as soon as I walked in the kitchen, of course, I stopped. I knew somebody had been in my house. And that was huge to me. All of a sudden, I become aware that whoever this is has access to my house. So I call the police. I do not mention the fruit. I just said, because I thought they'd think I was crazy. So I just said, I think somebody's coming and going from my house. Well, because no items had been stolen, they wouldn't even come and take a report. That made me feel incredibly powerless. Then he changed tactics, and he began coming into my house while we were sleeping. One morning I woke up and went to go brew a pot of coffee, and the coffee pot wasn't where it always was. So I went into the living room to kind of open the curtains and let in more light to see what in the world happened to the coffee pot. And it was sitting right in the middle of the living room couch. A coffee pot on a couch doesn't sound like a bomb, but it felt like one. Because that meant somebody came into our house while we were sleeping and did that. So he's escalating his tactics. He's feeling more and more brave, confident he won't be caught. No one's looking. Now I can even come in when she's sleeping. That was a huge moment for me. That was the first time during my whole ordeal that I began to feel fear. Fear came into my life that day. And that's a powerful thing, to be single, no gun, no dog, no security system, no money, really, to get any of it. Cops are taking reports sometimes. Family and friends are hesitant to believe me. They're in denial too. And somebody is coming in your house at night, leaving a little calling card that quietly screams, I was here, and there's nothing you can do about it.
Helena, how was your daughter dealing with all this?
Thankfully, by then, she's a teenager. She's preteen. It was my blessing that young girls, 12, 13 years old, pay attention to nothing but themselves, their friends, their phone, or a mirror. So it wasn't really hard for me to hide a lot because she wasn't looking. She was self-absorbed, enjoying her own life, this huge network of friends, lots of activities. And I was very good at lying to her. Oh, Mommy's just tired. No, we're not going to go to the store right now. We'll go later. just making excuses as to why we can't live our normal life anymore.
And how did things start to escalate after he had started coming into your house at night?
Always wondering what's next. It would stop. It would start up again. Stop for weeks. You start to forget about it. You start to breathe a little bit, be a little bit more willing to take your normal routes back and forth to work. Because changing your routes up is really exhausting and problematic. Imagine having to take a different route to work every day. You get exhausted planning it, and that's just your drive to work, let alone everything else you do. Oh, I can't stop at that Starbucks. I stopped there twice this week. You can't create any patterns or habits because a stalker jumps on those. So you're forever trying to change up your routine, and that gets so tiring. We shop at a grocery store because we know the layout. We go to the same one. We probably all do. Why? Because who wants to spend an entire evening rethinking a grocery store? But to a stalking victim, that is a very dangerous thing to do, to go to the same places over and over. So I became instinctively aware that I needed to change things up constantly. I felt that was the best defense I could put up, not be predictable. So as a result, my anxiety is increasing. I begin withdrawing from everyone. I don't trust anyone anymore. I'm not entirely certain who's stalking me, but something weird is going on. And I'm really starting to look at even family members and close friends as the culprit, kind of trying to gauge who's morally bankrupt enough to do this to me. So I just stopped talking. I stopped leaving the house. I stopped going out with friends. I stopped going over to family's house. I kind of withdrew from the world, and missing a ton of work. So it came a moment where I knew I couldn't see him and pretend anymore. I began to step more into a stage of awareness that the only thing that made sense was this man was stalking me. I'd started to rule out too many possibilities that it could be other people. That took several months to get to that place. There came a moment where I really started to get the feeling that I was being watched inside my house. And it just grew stronger and stronger and stronger. It was no longer just somebody's coming and going free will. It's, I feel like they're watching me right now. So at first you kind of say, oh, you're getting paranoid. Helena, stop. But it just won't go away. Just like all the feelings I'd had. The guy watching me at the pool, the strange call, that all added up to truth. And I feared that this one would too. So I began dressing and showering in the dark. It was the only way I knew how to live a normal life. I'm just going to change my clothes in the dark. So I came up with this organized system of where the recliner in my bedroom, I pretended like it represented a clock. So when I got out of the shower and I went to my recliner, all of the things that I needed were in order. So like my panties and my bra at 12 o'clock, my shirt at 3 o'clock. So I didn't need to see. I could dress in the dark. Well, one day I was running late for work, and I followed the same routine, showering in the dark. And I go to my recliner, and I realize I can't find my bra. I didn't put it in the right place. So I'm feeling around, and all the clothes are getting all jumbled up, and they're falling all over the floor. And I'm naked. And the last thing in the world I want to do is flip my light on. And I just become overwhelmed, and I start pounding my own forehead with my fist, saying, "You are so stupid. Can't you do anything right?" And those words echoed back to me in the dark, in the morning, and I heard what I was saying to myself. And I was getting mad at myself because I couldn't dress successfully in the dark, when the real tragedy was it didn't feel safe dressing in the light. And I dropped to the floor, and I started crying uncontrollably for a very long time. And everything that had happened to me, all of these incidences, these strange faces, strange cars, strange notes, strange call, sitting outside my job, it just hit me like a hailstorm of bullets. I got it. And I knew at that moment I was never sleeping with him again. I hated myself that I had done it for so long, been so naive for so long, so gullible for so long, listening to all the advice of people who loved me but were wrong.
How did he react when you told him that you were ending it?
I didn't. I did what I call military silence. No phone calls, no texts, no emails, no response to his behavior. Nothing. It got shut down quick. At first, I started getting texts. "How you doing?" I ignored him. A little while later, "How you doing?" I ignored him. By that night, it's in all caps. "What in the hell is your problem?" So he's really starting to get angry that I will not engage with him anymore. I decided I didn't care what it was. I was calling the police every single time. And I was going to request that they take a report, even if they thought it was a waste of their time. So it's somewhere within me, I know I'm building a case. I'm done messing around. Fast forward, it gets worse. Now, pretty much everyone I know is reporting items got stolen from their garage, or their car was damaged, or their laptop got stolen out of their car. And, given, one might say that's a coincidence. Well, if literally everyone in your tight network all call you and say the same thing, even when they don't know each other, and you realize the common link between all 7 of these people is me. It doesn't take an Einstein to begin realizing he's targeting family and friends because I won't speak to him. So then you're left with a question. Do I start sleeping with him again to save them? What do I do? That went on for months. I guess I didn't get a clear answer. The only thing that I could think of was I just won't connect with those people. So not only did I do basically military silence with him, I shut down everyone in my world. It was the only way I knew to keep them safe. If I wasn't talking to them, then he wasn't interested in them. So my world grew more and more isolated. I suppose at that time, it was the first time I started thinking about suicide, feeling like it was the only way out. I don't know how to be an army of one with no money and no real help. When I touch on the memory of being suicidal, it feels so powerful to me to relive that memory, to touch that moment again, because I'm sitting here in a beautiful life. Not perfect, not flawless, not wealthy, but beautiful just the same. A place of deep peace. An adult child who's just graduated college. I have a granddaughter now. I just published a book. I opened an Etsy shop. So there's all this wonderful energy surrounding me. And I made it through. I made it through that moment in my life. And to think I almost gave up before I got here, before I reached my destiny, is very powerful to think of what I would have lost. So it really hit me profoundly to even say those words out loud again.
So Helena, once you hit that low point, how did you get yourself out of that?
So once I reached that low point, I suppose I knew either I would succumb and perish, and this moment would literally take my life, or I had to do something differently. And clearly nothing I was doing was working. But as a stalking victim, you are your best chance at getting out of this. Actually, you're your only chance. If you're waiting to change minds, you're wasting your time. If you're waiting for the cops to step in and enforce laws that aren't on the books, it's not going to happen. The way you change your situation, number one, is by changing the dialogue in your head. Once fear entered the picture, it was really easy for hope to flee. And for a long time, I suffered under the weight of that. But somehow, probably just through the will of a mother, knowing I had to carry on, I had to come up with something for the sake of my daughter. If I wasn't going to end my life, I had better do something. And so I made what I thought the natural decision is to leave. To leave town. Quietly, quickly. Tell no one. Literally load everything you have in your little car and head out into the wide world and not tell anyone where you're going. And so that's what I did.
Where did you go?
I moved to the Gulf Coast of Mississippi. I figured he would never look for me there. And so that's what we did. My daughter, our cat, some clothes, a Bible, and a fistful of money from my mother. And we just drove until we couldn't drive anymore.
Once you got there, did you feel relieved? Was life different?
I would like to tell you that I felt relieved instantly, but I didn't. I don't know why I didn't. I think after so many years, because by the time that I left to go to Mississippi, the stalking had been going on for 5 years now. So I think it was hard to ask myself to all of a sudden just start dancing happy. That was unrealistic. I still had not dealt with the stalking and what it felt like to be so afraid for so long, driving over 1,000 miles away to get away from this madman. I was extremely exhausted at that point in my life.
Was he able to find you?
He was. I don't know what mistakes I made. I looked over my car for a GPS. Before we left, I searched inside and outside. I never found one. I would assume he had one on my car. Otherwise, how would he have known where I was at real time, all the time? So it seemed logical to me that he had one, but I could not find it. But I'm not a mechanic, so I have to be honest. You could put a dishwasher part on my car, and I might not know it doesn't belong there. So I could have found it and not even known that's what it was. But I do believe in hindsight, there had to have been a GPS still on my car. I don't know when he discovered we were there. I would assume immediately. But I began to feel a little bit more comfortable. I hadn't seen him, nothing strange going on. I'm starting to think maybe this was a good move. Maybe this was a good idea. Hope is kind of starting to come back into my world. I'm breathing a little easier. Oh my gosh, I haven't had a stalking episode for months. And as he does, as stalkers do, one day I go to the post office in Gulfport, Mississippi. And I pull up alongside the curb to drop a letter in the outdoor mailbox. And something catches my eye, and I look over, and there he is, sitting in a truck, staring at me, smiling. And everything in my mind changed that day. I thought I was the dumbest thing that had ever walked. How could I move 1,000 miles away and lead him to me? What did I do wrong? Surely a smarter person could have figured out how to pull this off. Surely a more loved person would have had help. Surely someone more deserving would have garnished more support from the police. It's all my fault. I never should have met him. I never should have slept with him. I should have killed myself when I had the guts. That was a very dark period in my life. And that went on for a long time. By now, my daughter's growing into a beautiful woman, graduating high school. And she's looking towards a future which is bright and lovely and hopeful. And I am just sliding into interior chaos inside me. I really don't know what else to do.
How often were you seeing him after you moved to Mississippi?
It wasn't nearly as regularly as it had been in Columbus, so I drew the conclusion that he had not moved there, but he was making regular appearances there. So weeks would go by, and I wouldn't see him. And then within a short period of time, 3, 4, 5 days, maybe a week, there would be a flurry of activity, a flurry of seeing him parked outside of the grocery store, parked near the bank when I was doing banking. At that point in time, I had a very good friend. I had made one close acquaintance here, and he began seeing him as well. So for the first time, I really have an eyewitness to what's going on, and that's critical. Not only that, he's a member of the armed services. So he has a proud reputation. He's a believable person. And as we're traveling around, he's kind of showing me the layout of the city. We're going out to eat. He begins seeing this same man over and over again. He begins getting strange phone calls. Things are starting to disappear out of his garage, tools being stolen. None of this had ever happened to him before. He has no doubt in his mind who it is, and he's seen him. And he has a lot of connections in town. This was the first time I began to form what I call a team. Next, I adopt an 85-pound pit bull. from the Humane Society. Unbelievable creature. Beautiful, powerful, wide mouth, low to the ground. They call him a gator pit down here. Unbelievable, powerful, lovable, wonderful blessing in my life on 4 legs. Now I have 2 people, 2 things on my team, a soldier and a pit bull. I'm starting to feel more powerful. I'm starting to feel like I have some allies. I have a dog keeping my home safe, and I have a soldier when I'm out in public. His name was JD. And JD finally reached a point where he said, this has got to stop. You have 2 choices. You either go to law enforcement or you give me all the information you have about this man. And me and my boys are driving to Columbus and we're going to kill him. The game stops here. I didn't like either option. I'd given up faith in law enforcement, and I feared that I would actually become more vulnerable if I went to law enforcement because I only had one friend in town. He couldn't be with me all the time, and dogs can get poisoned. So I feared the repercussions if I went to the police. But the idea of him going and killing my stalker was terrifying to me, because then what? Do all of his friends show up? Is this, like, where does this end? And I didn't like either choice, so I just stalled him for a while. And one day he shows up with a laptop, and he said, start typing, and I'll be back on Monday to pick you up. We're going to the sheriff's. So I did. And my story just came spilling out. Everything I'd been through. It was like a diary. And pages and pages. And on Monday, he picked me up and he took me to the sheriff's office. And I walked in, and I had the good fortune of meeting an incredible member of law enforcement. He had a very Old West Texas lawman feel about him, which is not surprising for Southern law enforcement. He asked insightful questions that no other police officer had ever asked, as if he really wanted to get to the bottom of this, as if he believed me. Now, I can't say he believed me at face value, but there was something about it that he communicated. I believe this is within the realm of possibility, and I'm going to look into it. And he did. And as the months went by, I believe he began making the connection that this man was in town, that this man was forming partnerships and connections in town. He wouldn't confirm it or deny it, and I'm not exactly sure why. He always just said, this case is under investigation, in a way that made me feel like, just start living. I got your back. So after I met him, my life really began to change, and I began to see myself as more of a survivor. And I was able to let go of the fear that one day I would be a body found floating in a river, whose story is never told, whose killer is never caught. And once I was able to articulate that deepest, darkest fear, which is he would kill me, it really empowered me to begin trying to live a real, authentic life again. And one day I was sitting at the beach, And the water speaks to you if you let it. There was this beautiful blue sky and this gorgeous sandy beach, and I'm just sitting there, and I thought, how am I going to start to rebuild my life and just finally lose this monster who's hunting me? And an idea came to me. I'm going to become an over-the-road truck driver. What are the chances he could follow me? And if he did, he would leave a sizable paper trail. And I would get paid to see America and see things I'd only dreamed of seeing. And all of a sudden, I became energized with hope for the future. It never occurred to me I'd be stepping into a man's world. It never occurred to me it was an odd solution. Like, I just did it. And I went through school and I got my CDL, and I began my journey as an over-the-road truck driver, all 48 states, solo, by myself. All of a sudden, my world began to open up. And when my world began to open up, my mind began to open up. And he became farther and farther and farther and farther away from the center of my thought. And I learned how to heal. In my book, I very much talk about the 4 critical steps that I took to learn how to heal.
Once you started that job, did you hear from him anymore?
I did. The stalking continued when I would return home. So I stayed on the road for long periods of time. I was one of those truck drivers that stayed out on the road 3 or 4 months at a time. As soon as I would come home, I would literally see him, meaning home in Mississippi. I would see him. So somehow there was still the awareness of where I am and when I'm going to be on what we call home time. He's still stalking me. He just can't stalk me when I'm away from home. But he's eager to see me when I get home.
What was law enforcement doing during this time?
I don't know what law enforcement was doing, and I knew I had no power to control what they were doing. But I knew what I was doing was working, which is if I'm getting a break every 3 or 4 months, for 3 or 4 months long, getting a break from this situation, and I'm out there in control of my life, reaching goals, then I only have to worry about it for the short period of time when I come home. At some point in time, it became clear to me that the FBI had taken on my case. I cannot tell you why or how. I've done a little bit of research about what warrants an FBI investigation. I do believe crossing state lines to stalk me met their federal criteria, tapping phone lines, GPS, stealing my mail. I probably wouldn't feel very comfortable discussing too much about it because it is still an open case. He has not yet gone to trial. The very last time that I saw him that I physically saw him was in 2016. I was traveling from New York to Nashville, and I happened to be passing through Columbus to do so. And near Kentucky, which is right on the border, maybe a 2-3 hours drive from Columbus, I saw him next to me in traffic, and it was on Father's Day. And he made it very obvious that he was next to me in traffic. And there were just so many thoughts that floated through my mind, like, first of all, I'm driving a semi that is currently weighing 80,000 pounds. I could squash you like a grape. And that felt so powerful. It really did. There he's sitting next to me in this little car that, when I look out my window, I'm looking down. And he's kind of waving, trying to make sure I knew he was there. And then finally he floored it, and he sped up in traffic, and he disappeared into the crowd, and I never saw him again. He continued to try to infiltrate my world through catfishing and emails and fake text messages until the year 2018. And as of this moment, I have not heard from him since in 2 years.
What did the FBI do to help out?
I don't know exactly what they physically did, but at some point, not only was I aware that they were in my case, most certainly he was aware, because nothing else would have stopped him. He's addicted. It's an obsession. You can't just turn off an obsession. Not that kind. So what they did or how they impacted my life or my case, I believe will become far more clear to me when the case goes to trial. But as I sit here right now, what I know is that it's over. I've healed. I've reached a better place in my life. I wrote a book. I'm okay.
What made you decide to write a book about your experience?
It started as letters to my daughter. Right before my first grandchild, my granddaughter, was born, I decided to come off the road and try my hand at just selling art. And when I first came home, while she was big, swollen belly, beautiful, pregnant, I started writing her letters, trying to kind of answer some of the questions that she's had the compassion to never ask me. You know, once she became an adult woman, certainly we talked about stalking. We talked about what I'd went through. But she always seemed to kind of not press too hard, feeling like when I was ready to really talk about my past, we would. But I didn't ever want to have this long sit-down, heart-to-heart, face-to-face. I decided I wanted to write letters about my journey so she could pick them up and read them whenever she wanted. And if it took her a lifetime, that was fine with me. So I started writing letters, and that's truly how the book began to manifest. And still to this day, the book is written as each chapter is actually a letter to my daughter, trying to explain the path I've walked, why I changed so much, why we had to leave our home, why it was important for me to become a truck driver. How did I reach this place of such peace now? I wanted to record all of that for her. And then there became a moment where I knew I wasn't writing these letters just for myself or for my daughter, that there were people out there who were living through this experience, or whether it's stalking or healing from any form of trauma, that might benefit from not talking to a professional, quote unquote, but from somebody who literally walked the same path, who went through the fire, who made it out alive, who made a ton of mistakes and is willing to talk about them.
Do you know where your stalker is now?
I do not.
What do you want to see happen to him? What's the end result for you that would give you the most justice?
I really have no feelings one way or the other, and that might be hard for you to believe, but I am so beyond, and I use that word very intentionally, I am beyond fearing him or caring what happens to him. The closest I come to having regard for his world is feeling a great deal of sympathy for his family and his children, because he didn't stop being a madman. Somewhere out there is his mother, his father, his children, who will be associated with this man who clearly has no moral compass. And that's someone they love. And so my heart goes to them.
You have such an incredible story of survival. Where can our listeners find your book?
Oh, thank you so much for asking that. My book is available on Amazon, Blue Moon, Rare Fire, The Extraordinary Story of a Woman's Rise When Darkness Fell by Helena Jayne Bryant. I also have an Etsy shop by the same name, Blue Moon, Rare Fire. So if anybody wants to grab some of my art, please visit me. I'm on Pinterest, Blue Moon, Rare Fire. You can follow me there. You can send me an email if you have any comments, or maybe you want to share your story privately. I'm not a counselor. I'm not law enforcement. I'm not an attorney. I can't advise, but I am with you in spirit. Same thing, bluemoonrarefire@gmail.com.
Helena, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, I thank you for giving a platform, not just for me to speak and me to share my story, but for so many others out there. Silence is the weapon of darkness.
We appreciate those words.
If anyone out there is in need of help or is a victim of stalking, please reach out. You can find a list of resources on our Instagram at Strictly Stalking Pod.
If you'd like to share your story with us on Strictly Stalking, you can reach us at strictlystalkingpod@gmail.com. That's strictlystalkingpod@gmail.com. You can watch our episodes on YouTube at youtube.com/strictlystalking.
And now we're on Patreon, where you can sign up for exclusive bonus episodes, case files, and check out show merchandise. Just go to patreon.com/strictlystalking.
I'm Jake Deptula.
And I'm Jaimie Beebe. Thank you for joining us on today's episode of Strictly Stalking.